Vincent Sterling smelled like expensive bourbon, winter frost, and the specific kind of violence that usually ended up on the evening news. He was standing by the reinforced steel door of the underground mansion, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke black shirt. Even in the sterile, fluorescent lighting of the bunker's foyer, the man looked like a predator. He was the most feared alpha on the eastern seaboard, a ruthless mafia boss who ruled his empire with an iron fist and a heart that had seemingly been carved out of ice. His pheromones were suffocating, a sharp, aggressive pine scent that commanded immediate submission from anyone within a 10-foot radius. Anyone that is except me. I am leaving for the Brooklyn docks, Vincent announced, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated against the obsidian walls. He loaded a sleek, matte black magazine into his Glock and slid it into his shoulder holster. The Russian cartel needs a reminder of who owns the shipping lanes. It will be bloody. May have fun. Don't forget to wipe your shoes before you come back inside, I mumbled, not looking away from the iPad in my hands. I was currently wearing a pair of oversized gray sweatpants, an ancient hoodie that was 3 sizes too big, and fluffy white socks. Vincent's piercing silver eyes snapped to me. For a moment, the brutal alpha stared at his newly hired live-in nanny and security monitor. I could see the muscle in his sharp jaw ticking. He was a man plagued by paranoia, haunted by the ghosts of a past where he had lost people he cared about. Leaving his home, and his 1-year-old adopted son Liam, always put him on edge. Riley, Vincent growled, taking a step closer. The sheer dominance radiating off him would have made a lesser Omega fall to their knees in sheer terror. I just shifted my weight from my left foot to my right because my heel was getting a little numb. Do not take your eyes off the monitors. If anything looks out of place, you lock down the inner vault and hit the panic buttons. I understood. Lockdown vault. Hit panic button, got it boss, I replied, suppressing a massive yawn that threatened to crack my jaw. Can you move a bit to the left? You're blocking the Wi-Fi router. Vincent looked like he wanted to either strangle me or demand a refund from the agency that sent me, eventually. He let out a harsh breath, turning on his heel. I'll be back by dawn. With a heavy, metallic clank, the massive blast door sealed shut behind him. Through the underground cameras, I watched his convoy of armored black SUVs roll out into the freezing New York blizzard, disappearing into the dark. Silence descended upon the Sterling estate. It was finally peaceful. All right, little man, I sighed, shuffling over to the playpen where baby Liam was happily gnawing on a plastic teething ring. The scary mob boss is gone. It's just you, me, in a highly questionable true crime documentary. I picked up the baby, resting him comfortably on my hip, and made my way into the security nerve center. Calling it a security room was an understatement. It was a multi-million-dollar command center that looked like it belonged in the Pentagon. Wall-to-wall monitors displayed every possible angle of the estate, the surrounding woods, and the access roads. The keyboards were mechanical, the mainframes hummed with liquid cooling efficiency, and the main chair was an ergonomic Herman Miller that felt like sitting on a cloud. This was exactly why I took this job. The pay was ridiculous, the boss was rarely home, and the seating arrangements were phenomenal. I set Liam down in his high-tech, bulletproof bassinet next to the console and handed him a freshly warmed bottle of formula. Then, I collapsed into the leather chair, letting out a groan of pure, unadulterated laziness. I propped my fluffy-socked feet up on the edge of the million-dollar control desk, booted up Netflix on the main central monitor, and reached for my ultimate treasure, a family-sized bag of neon orange cheese puffs. Life for a brief, glorious moment was perfect. I tore open the bag. The loud crinkle of the plastic echoed in the quiet room. I popped a cheese puff into my mouth, savoring the artificial cheddar goodness, and hit play on my show. Beep, beep, beep. I froze mid-chew. The obsidian walls of the security nerve center were suddenly bathed in a pulsing, aggressive crimson light. The soft hum of the servers was instantly drowned out by the shrill, deafening wail of the master alarm. On the wall, 20 different camera feeds flashed a bright, warning yellow. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, I muttered, slowly lowering my bag of chips. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just felt a profound, soul-crushing sense of annoyance. I leaned forward, dusting neon orange cheese powder off my fingers onto my sweatpants, and tapped the master diagnostic screen. Warning: massive firewall breach detected. External override in progress. Someone was hacking the mainframe. And they were good. Lines of malicious code were eating through Vincent's military-grade encryption like acid through paper. But that wasn't all. I glanced at the thermal radar display, outside, in the freezing blizzard. 30 distinct heat signatures were rapidly approaching the perimeter fence. They were moving in a perfect tactical formation. These weren't street thugs, they were highly trained, heavily armed mercenaries. They were coming to slaughter everyone inside. Beside me, Liam dropped his bottle. The blaring sirens were scaring him, his little lower lip trembling as he prepared to let out a deafening wail. SHH, it's okay, buddy, I cooed lazily, reaching over to pat his head. Suddenly, the monitors flickered violently. The lights overhead buzzed, sparked, and died. The hum of the servers flatlined. The main power grid had just been severed from the outside. Emergency red backup lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. A heavy, muffled boom echoed from the floor above. They were using C4 explosives on the reinforced front doors. The invasion had begun. I stared at the black Netflix screen reflecting my own tired, unimpressed face. I let out a long, heavy sigh that carried the weight of a man who truly just wanted a nap. Great, I grumbled, sinking deeper into my chair. The internet's down. I was just getting to the good part. The shockwave from the C4 explosion rattled the floorboards, sending a fine layer of dust falling from the ceiling vents directly onto my cheese puffs. I stared at the ruined snack, my heart sinking with genuine sorrow. That was the last family-sized bag, I whispered mournfully. Before I could properly grieve the loss of my artificial cheddar, a high-pitched, terrifying wail pierced the air. Liam. The poor kid had been jolted awake by the blast. His tiny face was scrunched up, his fists waving frantically in the air as he let out a scream that rivaled the master alarm in sheer decibels. Hey, it's alright, tiny boss, I muttered, quickly wiping my orange-dusted fingers on my oversized sweatpants before scooping him out of the bassinet. I bounced him on my hip, resting my chin on his soft hair. Just some rude neighbors. Nothing we can't handle. Suddenly, the central monitor, the one that had previously been displaying my interrupted true crime documentary, glitched violently. The screen pixelated into a sea of gray static before snapping into a crisp, high-definition video feed. The face staring back at me was not a serial killer from a documentary, but it was close enough. It was a man with a thick, jagged scar running down his left cheek, chomping on a half-lit cigar. He wore a tailored pinstripe suit that screamed mobster cliché. I recognized him immediately from Vincent's heavily encrypted dossiers, Falcone, the head of the rival Brooklyn syndicate. Falcone leaned closer to the camera, his dark eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. He looked ready to deliver a chilling, blood-curdling monologue about vengeance and power. Vincent Sterling, Falcone spat, his voice booming through the command center's surround sound speakers. Your reign of terror ends tonight. My men are already inside your walls. Your fortress is a tomb, and your legacy dies with. He stopped. Falcone blinked, his thick brow furrowing as he squinted at the camera feed on his end. He wasn't looking at the fearsome, cold-blooded alpha he expected to see. Instead, he was staring at a 20-something Omega in an oversized gray hoodie, looking profoundly bored, bouncing a wailing toddler on his hip. Who the hell are you? Falcone demanded, the cigar nearly dropping from his mouth. Where is Sterling? He stepped out for a bit, I replied, suppressing a yawn. Can I take a message? Or would you prefer to leave a voicemail? Because honestly, you're being really loud, and the kid is having a bit of a meltdown here. Liam wailed louder, his little hands gripping the collar of my hoodie. The combination of the blaring red sirens, the distant gunfire from the first floor, and Falcone's booming voice over the intercom was too much for the 1-year-old. Listen to me, you pathetic little Omega, Falcone snarled, recovering his intimidating mob boss persona. He slammed a fist on his desk. You tell Sterling that I'm taking everything he loves. My men are going to. Hold that thought, I interrupted, raising a finger. I stretched my right leg out. The ergonomic Herman Miller chair rolled back just enough for my fluffy sock-clad foot to reach the secondary control panel under the desk. With my big toe, I flicked a specific toggle switch and pressed down on a large, red macro key I had programmed on my first day of work. Instantly the blaring, aggressive security sirens were cut off. In their place, the mansion's multi-million-dollar, concert-grade acoustic sound system roared to life. Baby Shark do-do-do-do-do-do. The upbeat, relentlessly cheerful children's song blasted through the underground bunker at maximum volume, echoing down the concrete hallways where heavily armed mercenaries were currently trying to breach the inner sanctum. It was absurd. It was surreal. It was the only thing that calmed Liam down. As the upbeat melody filled the room, I tapped another button on the console. A thick layer of soundproof, bullet-resistant glass smoothly slid over Liam's high-tech bassinet, creating a perfectly silent, cozy little bubble for him. I gently placed the now quieting baby inside, handing him his bottle. He grabbed it eagerly, his tears already drying. "There you go, buddy. Enjoy the show," I smiled. I turned my attention back to the main monitor. Falcon looked like he was having a stroke. The veins in his neck were bulging as he tried to yell over the cheerful children's choir singing about Mommy Shark. "What is this?" Falcon roared, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. "Turn that infernal music off. I will have you FLAYD alive. Do you hear me? I will." I let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, leaning into the microphone on the desk. "Look, man," I said, keeping my voice low and monotonous. "I'm just the nanny. I don't get paid enough to listen to villain monologues, and frankly, you're ruining the vibe. Keep your voice down. The kid is trying to sleep." Falcon's jaw dropped. You insolent little." "I'm gonna hang up now," I said casually. "Have a terrible night." Before he could scream another threat, I reached over and hit the disconnect button. The screen went black, cutting off Falcon's furious face mid-sentence. Silence, aside from the muffled, distant thumping of Baby Shark echoing from the upper floors, returned to the nerve center. I rolled my chair closer to the main keyboard. The tactical radar on the secondary monitor showed a dozen red dots successfully breaching the first-floor hallway. They were bypassing the physical locks, moving closer to the stairwell that led down to the bunker. I glanced at the time. 11:42 p.m. If I hurried, I could probably clean up this mess and still catch the season finale of my show before 1:00 a.m. All right, I cracked my neck, wincing at the stiffness. I looked at my right hand, flexing the fingers lazily. Guess I actually have to do some work today. The tactical radar on my secondary monitor looked like a highly aggressive game of Pac-Man. A dozen glowing red dots were funneling into the main ground floor corridor, their movements sharp, coordinated, and thoroughly professional. They were sweeping the rooms, clearing corners, moving with the lethal precision of men who killed for a living. Unfortunately for them, they were currently marching to the upbeat, relentless rhythm of Baby Shark, which I had thoughtfully piped into the ground floor speakers. I figured if they were going to assassinate my boss, they should at least suffer a little psychological torture first. All right, let's see what we have here, I muttered, blinking sleepily at the screen. I was currently engaged in a highly complex multitasking operation. Since Liam was safely encased in his bulletproof, soundproof bassinet bubble, I had retrieved his favorite stuffed animal, a slightly terrifying plush octopus, and wedged it under my left arm for emotional support. My left arm, frankly, was exhausted from holding the baby earlier, and I saw absolutely no reason to lift it. Meanwhile, my bare feet, I had kicked off the fluffy socks because they were getting too warm, were expertly clamped around Liam's bottle of formula, gently rolling it back and forth over the portable desk heater to bring it to the perfect lukewarm temperature. It was an advanced parenting technique I had perfected during my second week on the job. That left only my right hand to deal with the heavily armed death squad currently infiltrating the mansion. "Okay guys, you're tracking mud all over the imported Italian marble," I sighed, watching camera feed 4. "Vincent is going to have a stroke." With my right index and middle fingers, I lazily tapped a few keys on the console. On the monitors, the ground floor corridor suddenly transformed. The Sterling estate wasn't just a mansion, it was a paranoid billionaire's wet dream. With a series of muted thwumps, the ceiling vents popped open, a milky white cloud of highly concentrated synthetic neurotoxin, non-lethal, but capable of knocking out a rhino in 3 seconds, flooded the hallway. Through the cameras, I watched half the red dots drop to the floor like synchronized swimmers performing a very aggressive dive. "Traptor time," I mumbled, hitting the enter key with my pinky. The floorboards beneath 3 more mercenaries gave way, plunging them into a polished steel holding cell in the sub-basement. They'd be stuck down there until someone remembered to let them out. Probably by Tuesday. In less than 2 minutes, 80% of the assault team had been neutralized without me ever having to adjust my posture. "Now, for the nerd in the chair," I said, rolling my neck. Falcon's hacker was still aggressively probing the inner vault's firewall. I had to admit, the guy had some skills. He was using a brute force algorithm combined with a localized EMP bypass. Impressive, if you were living in 2021. But right now, it was just annoying, like a mosquito buzzing near your ear while you were trying to nap. I leaned closer to the keyboard. Typing with one hand was slightly slower, but lifting my left arm from its plush octopus embrace simply required too much caloric expenditure. My right hand blurred across the keys, inputting lines of counter code. "Trace route initiated." Bypassing Proxy 1. Proxy 2. Proxy 3. Oh, you're routing through a server in Chicago. How vintage. I chuckled dryly. Let's go say hi. I slipped through the hacker's backdoor, weaving past his digital tripwires with the muscle memory of a past life I actively tried to forget. I didn't just kick him out of Vincent's mainframe, I grabbed his digital IP by the throat and followed it straight back to Falcone's Central Syndicate servers. Once I was inside Falcone's network, I took a moment to look around. It was a goldmine of illegal ledgers, blackmail material, and offshore banking routing numbers. You interrupted my true crime documentary, I whispered to the empty room, tapping a rhythm on the desk. You woke up the baby. And most unforgivably, you made me drop my cheese puffs. My fingers danced. I compiled a nasty, highly aggressive piece of ransomware, a little something I had coded years ago when I was bored on a Tuesday. I dropped it directly into Falcone's primary financial server. Execute. I watched with mild satisfaction as the code ate through Falcone's network. On my screen, a progress bar flashed, freezing offshore accounts. Slush Fund A, $120 million locked. Slush Fund B, $380 million locked. $500 million of cartel blood money, entirely frozen and locked behind a 256-bit encryption key that consisted entirely of lyrics from Baby Shark. It would take them 3 lifetimes and a supercomputer to crack it. That's for the snacks, I yawned, stretching my right arm. I glanced over at my feet. The milk was perfectly warm. I nudged the bottle out of the heater's range and finally looked back at the tactical radar to confirm the mansion was clear. My sleepy eyes widened a fraction. The radar wasn't clear. One red dot remained, and it wasn't dropping into trapdoors or passing out from the gas. It was moving fast, unnaturally fast. It had already bypassed the lower security gates and was currently ascending the private stairwell that led directly to the security nerve center on the 2nd floor. I zoomed in on camera 7. The feed was grainy, filled with dissipating gas, but I could see him, a massive, towering figure clad in advanced tactical gear. He wore a matte black ballistic mask, but I didn't need to see his face to recognize what he was. The sheer, terrifying speed in the raw, aggressive aura radiating off him through the screen gave it away. An alpha, a top-tier, elite assassin. And he was pissed. I watched him rip a heavy steel security door off its hinges with his bare hands. He stepped into the hallway right outside my command center. I didn't panic. I just let out a long, exhausted breath. Seriously, I groaned, dropping the plush octopus. I don't get paid enough for physical labor. Outside the room, heavy boots stopped just beyond the thick steel of my door. Bang! A suppressed gunshot shattered the reinforced electronic lock. The heavy metal door creaked, the hinges groaning as they were kicked open from the outside. I didn't run. I simply reached down, picked up the freshly warmed baby bottle, and spun my chair around to face the door. The heavy steel door didn't just open, it was violently separated from its hinges, crashing onto the pristine marble floor of the security nerve center with a deafening metallic clang. A thick cloud of drywall dust and lingering synthetic neurotoxin drifted into the room. Out of the smoke stepped a walking tank. He was at least 6'5", clad in top-tier matte black tactical gear, complete with ceramic plating and a ballistic half-mask that obscured the lower half of his face. He held a suppressed HK Mark 23 tactical pistol, and the muzzle was pointed directly at the center of my forehead. But worse than the gun were his pheromones. He was an alpha, and he was currently radiating an aggressive, choking scent of burnt copper, gunpowder, and raw hostility. It was the kind of biological pressure designed to force an omega to their knees in paralyzed, primal terror. I just remained seated in my ergonomic Herman Miller chair, clutching a baby bottle. "Where is Vincent Sterling?" the assassin demanded, his voice a distorted, gravelly growl through his mask. I blinked sleepily at him. "Do I look like his secretary?" "He went to Brooklyn. You missed him by about 30 minutes, if you want. You can leave a note on the fridge." The assassin's stance shifted, clearly thrown off by my profound lack of terror. He stepped fully into the room, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're a very stupid little omega. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to put a bullet between your eyes, take the Sterling air, and burn this compound to ashes." "See, now that's just unnecessary overtime for the cleaning staff," I sighed, shaking my head. "And I hate overtime." He aimed. He was about to shoot. I moved. To the untrained eye, it probably looked like I was having a clumsy panic attack. I knocked over a stack of paperwork on my desk with my left hand, creating a momentary visual distraction. With my right hand, I didn't reach for the perfectly warmed bottle meant for Liam. Instead, I grabbed the other bottle, the reject. The one I had messed up 20 minutes ago, filled with scalding hot water from the electric kettle and a clumpy, unmixed mass of formula powder. With a flick of my wrist, I squeezed the cheap plastic of the reject bottle and whipped it forward. A jet of boiling sticky, clumpy artificial milk shot across the room, splashing directly through the islets of the assassin's ballistic mask. Args the Alpha roared in shock and agony. The scalding liquid blinded him instantly, the sticky formula adhering to his retinas. He stumbled backward, his gun wavering wildly as his free hand flew to his face to claw at the burning mess. But he was an elite. I knew from past experience that the pain would only disorient him for about 3 seconds before muscle memory and pure rage allowed him to fire blindly into the room. I needed to shut down his brain completely. So, I dropped my scent blockers. Normally as an Omega, my natural scent is faint, mostly suppressed by medication so I can blend into the background and take naps in peace. But right now, I didn't just release my scent, I weaponized it. I pushed every ounce of biological energy I had into the room, flooding the air with the overwhelming, concentrated aroma of chamomile. It wasn't a seductive scent. It was the deep, heavy, biologically engineered pheromone of a nesting Omega soothing a colicky infant. It was a scent that screamed safe, warm sleep, protect. The physiological whiplash hit the Alpha like a freight train, his biology, wired by millions of years of evolution to protect Omegas and cubs, violently collided with his adrenaline-fueled intent to murder. I watched his knees literally buckle. His brain short-circuited as the aggressive burnt copper scent he was emitting dissolved into confused, scattered panic. His hand holding the gun dropped a few crucial inches. That was all the time I needed. I finally stood up. I hated standing up. I reached behind the server rack and yanked out a thick, bright blue Cat6 Ethernet cable. I snapped it like a whip, the heavy plastic connector at the end cracking through the air. The cable wrapped tightly around the assassin's wrist. I jerked it downward with a sharp, brutal twist of my hips. Crack! His wrist snapped. The heavy pistol clattered uselessly to the floor. The Alpha let out another roar, trying to lunge at me despite his blinded eyes and broken wrist. He was huge, heavily armored, and still incredibly dangerous. I didn't step back. I stepped into his guard. I grabbed the premium, shatterproof borosilicate glass baby bottle, the good one, still filled with perfectly lukewarm milk, and swung it with the precise, lethal momentum of a ghost who used to do this for a living. The reinforced glass bottom connected with the base of the assassin's skull, striking the vagus nerve cluster with devastating accuracy. There was a sickening thud. The towering, elite Alpha assassin's eyes rolled back into his head. His massive frame crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut, hitting the floorboards with a crash that rattled my desk monitors. Silence descended on the room once again. I stood over the unconscious giant, chest heaving slightly. I looked at the blue Ethernet cable in my hand, then at the baby bottle. The bottle was completely intact. Not even a scratch. 5-star review on Amazon for sure, I muttered, setting the bottle safely on the desk. I looked down at the puddle of scalding, clumpy milk slowly seeping into the expensive Persian rug, right next to the assassin's head. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get formula stains out of wool? I complained to the unconscious man, rubbing my temples. This is exactly why I retired. The sheer amount of physical exertion is just ridiculous. I bent down, retrieved a spare laptop charging cable from the floor, and began tying the elite assassin into a tight, incredibly uncomfortable knot. If Vincent didn't give me a raise for this, I was seriously going to quit. Tying up a 250-pound elite Alpha assassin with a braided, heavy-duty laptop charging cable is surprisingly difficult. It requires a lot of bending, pulling, and an uncomfortable amount of core strength. I was sweating by the time I finished wrestling him into a tight, incredibly humiliating hogtie. See, this is why I strictly requested light duty in my contract, I muttered to myself, out of breath, as I pulled the final knot taut. Beneath me, the mountain of tactical gear let out a low, guttural groan. The assassin was waking up. The heavy dose of my chamomile pheromones was still lingering in the air, keeping his alpha instincts suppressed in a haze of biochemical confusion. But the sheer pain in his snapped wrist and the blunt force trauma to his vagus nerve were cutting through the fog. He blinked his eyes open. His mask was still coated in the sticky, congealing mess of the rejected baby formula. He tried to move, realized his arms and legs were bound securely behind his back with a 6-foot USB-C cable, and let out a muffled snarl. I will skin you, he rasped, his voice slurring slightly from the concussion. Yeah, get in line. The IRS wants a piece of me too, I sighed, standing up and wiping my hands on my hoodie. As I lifted my arm, the oversized, stretched out sleeve of my gray hoodie slipped down past my elbow. The assassin's bloodshot eyes tracked the movement. Suddenly, his struggling stopped. The aggressive, furious scent of burnt copper that he had been weakly emitting vanished entirely, replaced by the sour, sharp stench of pure, unadulterated terror. He was staring at my inner forearm. I glanced down right there. Etched into the pale skin just below the crook of my elbow was a faded, jagged barcode tattoo with the serial number 00-Ghost-SV. It was an old mark, a stupid, edgy mistake from a past life I had deliberately buried under mountains of junk food and minimum wage jobs. The assassin's voice trembled. All the bravado, all the elite mercenary conditioning completely evaporated. He looked at me as if I had just grown horns and breathed hellfire. That marked. It's impossible. I casually pulled my sleeve back down, covering the tattoo, I know right. I got it in Vegas. The artist was completely hammered. The lines aren't even straight. You're the ghost, he breathed, his pupils dilating in sheer horror. The ghost of Silicon Valley. You're the S-rank that wiped out the entire West Coast syndicate 3 years ago. You disabled the Pentagon's firewall in 10 minutes. You killed Don Morty with a single business card. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling a headache coming on. Okay. First of all, it was a laminated business card, not a playing card. The aerodynamics are completely different. And second of all, keep your voice down. The baby just went back to sleep. They said you died, he gasped, desperately trying to squirm away from me like a trapped worm. They said you were assassinated. I died of a severe allergic reaction to corporate meetings and mandatory overtime. I corrected him lazily. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be a top-tier assassin? The running, the jumping, the constant cardio. Cardio is a scam invented by the fitness industry to sell shoes. I quit. Now I'm a nanny. It comes with dental. The assassin looked like his brain was short-circuiting. The most feared, legendary killer and hacker in the American underworld. A ghost story told to scare cartel bosses into locking their doors at night. Was currently wearing fluffy socks and complaining about cardio. Now, if you don't mind, your little home invasion has really stressed out my skin, I said, walking over to my duffel bag in the corner of the room. And stress causes premature aging. I pulled out a small tub of green, mint-scented clay face mask and a spatula. Sterling doesn't know what you are, the assassin stammered, panic-lacing his tone. If he finds out, he might ask me to actually do work around here. I interrupted, walking back over to him. I grabbed a brightly colored, spiked rubber ball from the floor. It was one of the toys belonging to Vincent Doberman, and unceremoniously shoved it into the assassin's mouth. Squeak. Keep quiet. I need to focus on my T-zone, I said. I rolled my chair back to the main console, grabbed a handheld mirror, and began meticulously applying the green clay to my face. As the cooling sensation soothed my skin, I glanced at the secondary monitor. The mansion's external sensors were still offline, which meant, to the outside world, the Sterling estate looked like a dark, silent tomb. I pulled up the encrypted GPS tracker attached to Vincent's armored Maybach. Then, just for fun, I bypassed the car's internal firewall and tapped into the dashcam. The live video feed popped onto my screen. Vincent was driving, and he was driving like a man possessed by demons. The speedometer on the digital display read 120 miles per hour, tearing through the blinding New York blizzard. His face was a mask of absolute, agonizing terror. The cold, calculating mafia boss was gone. In his place was a desperate alpha whose worst nightmare had just come true. The dashcam's audio picked up his ragged, heavy breathing and the terrified silence of his right-hand man Carter, who was gripping the passenger handle for dear life. Vincent had lost his family once before. The thought of losing his adopted son and, surprisingly, his lazy, annoying new nanny, had clearly shattered whatever iron control he usually possessed. He was emitting so much distressed alpha pheromone that I could practically smell the ozone through the screen. I watched him run a red light, nearly drifting the 2-ton armored vehicle into a snowbank before violently jerking the wheel back. I paused, the spatula hovering over my cheek. A tiny, microscopic pang of guilt flickered in my chest. Oh boy. He thinks we're dead, I mumbled, spreading the green clay over my nose. He's definitely going to pop a blood vessel at this rate. I reached for the keyboard to turn the mansion's lights back on to signal that we were okay, but then I looked down at the ruined bag of cheese puffs on the floor. I pulled my hand back. Nah, he can sweat a little bit, I decided. It builds character. I leaned back in the Herman Miller chair, pulled my noise-canceling headphones over my ears, and hit play on my Netflix documentary. The green clay mask was drying nicely. Now, all I had to do was wait for the boss to get home. I kept one eye on the season finale of my true crime documentary and the other on the live dashcam feed of Vincent's armored Maybach. Honestly, watching Vincent Sterling right now was more intense than any thriller Netflix could produce. He was driving through the New York blizzard with the reckless, suicidal speed of a man who had nothing left to lose. The speedometer hovered dangerously near 130 miles per hour, the heavy tires struggling for grip on the icy asphalt. Through the hacked internal cabin camera, I had a front row seat to his psychological breakdown. The cold, calculated, untouchable capo of the East Coast was entirely gone. The man gripping the steering wheel looked like a ghost. His knuckles were bone white, the leather of the steering wheel visibly groaning under his crushing grip. His jaw was locked so tight I was surprised his teeth weren't shattering. But it was his eyes that really got me. In my previous line of work, I had seen a lot of men look death in the face. I knew what panic looked like. I knew what fear looked like. But the look in Vincent's silver eyes wasn't just fear. It was the absolute, hollow agony of a man who was already attending a funeral in his mind. I remembered reading his heavily classified dossier before taking this job. 5 years ago, a rival syndicate had hit his family's safe house. Vincent had been tied up in a meeting, ignored a phone call, and arrived 10 minutes too late. He had walked into a slaughterhouse. Right now, looking at the dashcam, I could see the exact moment the ghosts of his past grabbed him by the throat. History was repeating itself. His security grid was down. His home was dark. His son and his completely defenseless, lazy nanny were trapped inside with 30 elite mercenaries. Beside him in the passenger seat, Carter, his usually stoic, hardened beta lieutenant, was pressed flat against the door, gripping the overhead handle like a lifeline. Even through the screen, I could almost feel the suffocating, violent wave of Vincent's alpha pheromones filling the car. It was the scent of pure, unadulterated despair mixed with a murderous rage that demanded blood. "Boss, you have to slow down," I heard Carter shout over the roar of the engine, his voice cracking. "We'll hit a patch of black ice. We won't be able to help them if we're dead." "Shut up," Vincent snarled. The sound was guttural, barely human. "They're in there, Carter. They're in the dark." I paused the Netflix documentary, a strange, uncomfortable knot tightening in my chest. Okay, maybe letting him sweat it out was a slightly toxic move. I muttered to the quiet security room. I glanced down at my face mask in the hand mirror. The green clay was perfectly dry. I should probably wash it off before the boss kicked the door down, but the sink was all the way down the hall, and the elite assassin hogtied on my floor was currently whimpering around his dog toy. I didn't want to leave him alone. He seemed emotionally fragile. On the monitor, the Maybach tore onto the private access road leading to the estate. Vincent didn't even bother waiting for the reinforced front gates to open. He simply slammed the 2-ton armored vehicle straight through them, sending twisted iron flying into the snowbanks. He hit the brakes, the car skidding wildly in a 180-degree turn before slamming to a halt on the gravel driveway. Before the car had even fully stopped, Vincent kicked his door open and threw himself out into the freezing storm. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't grab backup. He just drew his Glock, his eyes fixed on the blown-out, smoldering remains of the mansion's front double doors. I switched my attention from the dashcam to the internal hallway cameras. Vincent and Carter burst into the grand foyer. The emergency red lighting cast long, bloody shadows across the imported marble. Vincent froze. Scattered across the floor, groaning in unconscious agony, were the elite mercenaries I had dropped with the neurotoxin and the trapdoors. The foyer looked like a war zone, but the blood didn't belong to the home's occupants. Carter let out a shaky breath, his gun raised. "Boss, what the hell happened here? Did they turn on each other?" Vincent didn't answer. He didn't look relieved, if anything. The sight of the neutralized mercenaries made his panic spike harder. To a paranoid alpha, an unexplained variable in a combat zone usually meant something much worse was waiting upstairs. He thought a third party had intervened. He thought whoever took out these men had already taken his son. "Liam," Vincent choked out, the name ripping from his throat like a physical wound. "Riley." He sprinted. I watched him take the grand staircase 3 steps at a time, Carter struggling to keep up. Vincent's chest was heaving, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with melting snow and cold sweat. He moved with the desperate, frantic energy of a man running out of oxygen. He reached the second-floor landing. The hallway leading to the security nerve center was dead silent, save for the faint muffled, incredibly cheerful melody of Baby Shark still playing from my sound system. I pulled my noise-canceling headphones down around my neck. Through the ruined doorway of my room, I could hear his heavy, frantic footsteps approaching. Thud, thud, thud. He stopped right outside the door. I heard the distinct, metallic click of the safety being switched off his Glock. I heard the harsh, jagged sound of his breathing. He was standing right on the other side of the broken steel frame, gathering whatever broken pieces of his soul he had left, preparing himself to walk in and find my corpse. I reached out, picked up a fresh cheese puff from a backup bag I kept in the bottom drawer, and popped it into my mouth. Well, I'm chewing thoughtfully. This should be fun. Vincent didn't just push the door open, he kicked the remaining, mangled steel frame so hard it ripped entirely out of the drywall, crashing to the floor with a deafening bang. He burst into the room like an avenging demon. His Glock was raised, his silver eyes wild and bloodshot, scanning the room for targets for blood, for the bodies of his family. He was radiating an alpha-killing intent so dense it actually made the air in the room feel heavy and suffocating. Carter rushed in right behind him, sweeping his M4 assault rifle across the dark corners. Liam, Vincent roared, the sound tearing out of his chest. Riley. I slowly blinked at him. The security nerve center was mostly illuminated by the glow of my 20 monitors. I imagine the scene they walked into was a lot to process. First, there was the elite, towering alpha assassin, a man who had probably murdered dozens of high-profile targets in his career, currently hogtied on my Persian rug with a braided USB-C laptop charging cable. He was wiggling weakly like an upside-down turtle, letting out muffled whimpers around the spiked, neon-pink rubber dog toy shoved into his mouth. Squeak. The dog toy made a pathetic little noise as the assassin bit down on it in distress. Second, there was the bassinet. The bulletproof, soundproof glass dome was sealed tight, inside, completely oblivious to the chaos, the explosives, and the elite hit squad. Baby Liam was fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. Above him, the multi-million-dollar surround sound system was softly, cheerfully looping the chorus of Baby Shark. And finally, there was me. I was leaning way back in my ergonomic Herman Miller chair, my bare feet propped up on the edge of the million-dollar control console. I was wearing an oversized, stretched-out gray hoodie. I held a half-eaten cheese puff in my right hand, and slathered entirely over my face, except for 2 circles around my eyes and my mouth, was a bright, mint green clay face mask. Vincent froze. The murderous, ozone-scented alpha pheromones hit a brick wall of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He stood there, his chest heaving, his gun still aimed at the wall, his silver eyes darting wildly between the squeaking assassin, the sleeping baby, and my green face. Behind him, Carter actually lowered his rifle. The hardened beta lieutenant stared at the hog-tied assassin, his jaw slowly dropping open. Is that the ghost operative from the European syndicate? Carter whispered, recognizing the tactical gear. He looked at the charging cable cutting into the assassin's wrists. Did you tie him up with an Apple charger? It's a generic brand actually. Braided nylon. Very durable. I corrected him lazily. I popped the cheese puff into my mouth. Crunch. Welcome home, boss. How was Brooklyn? Vincent didn't answer. The Glock slipped from his trembling hand, clattering onto the marble floor. The sheer physiological shock of preparing for a bloodbath, only to find a slumber party, send him crashing. He staggered forward, dropping to his knees beside the bassinet. He pressed his large, trembling hands against the soundproof glass, staring at Liam's sleeping face. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob, his broad shoulders shaking as the crushing weight of his terror finally evaporated. He stayed there for a long moment, just grounding himself, making sure it was real, making sure his nightmare hadn't come true again. Then slowly, Vincent stood up. He turned to look at me. The frantic panic in his silver eyes was gone. In its place was something entirely different. It was a dark burning, incredibly intense hyperfixation. His alpha instincts, having realized that his territory and his pack had been successfully defended, were now zeroing in on the Omega sitting casually at the desk. He walked over to me. He didn't care about the green clay. He didn't care about the cheese puff dust on my sweatpants. He leaned over the desk, invading my personal space, his face inches from mine. He smelled like winter storms, expensive bourbon, and a dangerous kind of possessiveness. You, Vincent rasped, his voice low and vibrating with an emotion I couldn't quite place. 30 men. Elite mercenaries. The mainframe hacked, and you. I know. It's a disaster, I sighed, gesturing vaguely toward the floor. Look at this mess. Do you know how hard it is to get clumpy baby formula out of an imported Persian rug? I tried telling him to take his shoes off, but some people just have no manners. Vincent stared at my faded barcode tattoo, which was slightly visible under my pushed-up sleeve. He connected the dots. He wasn't stupid. He realized he hadn't hired a helpless, lazy Omega to watch his son. He had hired a retired weapon of mass destruction. A slow, dangerous, breathtaking smirk curved onto the mafia boss's lips. You protected him, Vincent whispered, his eyes dropping to my lips before snapping back to my eyes. You protected what is mine. Yeah, well, he's a good kid, I muttered, suddenly feeling a little warm under the intensity of his gaze. But let's get down to business, Sterling. This was explicitly outside my job description. The contract said late childcare and monitor watching. It did not say single-handedly dismantling a corporate espionage hit squad while making sure the milk is lukewarm. Carter, still standing by the door in utter shock, let out a choked, hysterical laugh. I have demands, I continued, ticking them off on my fingers. First, I want hazard pay. Second, I need a new bag of family-sized cheese puffs, because the explosion ruined mine. Third, I am billing you for emotional distress and skin damage. Do you have any idea what adrenaline does to the pores? It's a nightmare. Vincent Sterling, the most feared man on the East Coast, the capo de capi who had just driven 130 miles an hour through a blizzard preparing to die, threw his head back and actually laughed. It was a deep, rich sound that echoed in the ruined room. He leaned back down, his silver eyes practically glowing as he looked at me. There was a promise in that look. A terrifying, thrilling promise that he was never, ever letting me go. Whatever you want, Riley, Vincent murmured, his voice dropping an octave as his hand reached out, gently wiping a smudge of green clay from my cheek with his thumb. Whatever you want, it's yours. Just name your price. I blinked at him, then let out a heavy sigh, leaning back in my chair. Great, I grumbled. Start by taking out the trash. He's squeaking again.